Welcome everyone to a very special live edition of Loaded and Rolling here at F3, the Future of Freight Festival. I'm Thomas Wasson, trucking expert here at FreightWaves. Going to have a great conversation with two guests, but before we begin, we have to thank our sponsor here, Cox Group. They are a WBE certified asset-based turnkey logistics solutions company located through North America with 22 million square feet of distribution space and over 1,000 power units. You can visit www.warehouseservices.com for more details. Now, on to the show. So we're going to be bringing on two guests here. Before we welcome Lisa, we have, first off, Lisa Haubenstock. She's the Vice President of Product at Truckstop. Going to be talking about cargo crime, fraud, everything you need to know, and ways to prevent it. And then later on in the second half, we're going to be talking about how 3PLs can help carriers navigate challenging market conditions with Jay Gustafson, EVP of Brokerage Operations at Echo Global. Without further ado, let's dive in with our first guest here. Lisa, pleasure to have you on the show here. Tell us a little about yourself first.
Sure. So I've been with Truckstop for about 4 years. Right now, I lead all of our product for risk, fraud, compliance solutions that we provide to our broker customers. And what makes my job really exciting, I came from the customer side of things for my first 3 years at Truckstop. So managing all of our customer experience, and the best part of my job is able to bring our customer's voice directly into our product strategy to make sure we're delivering best products.
And I think that's really good. Coming from the front lines, customer facing, fraud has exploded. I used to joke with people that we used to have a very high trust kind of business where I could call you and tell you my MC number, and you would say, yeah, that's Thomas.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about some of these challenges now.
Yeah, so what's interesting is I think that a lot of the conversation about fraud these days is that fraud is new, it's a new thing, and it's so different, and it's definitely different than it ever has been. But Truckstop has actually been tracking fraud and stolen loads and all different kinds of nefarious behavior for almost 30 years. And so what we can see is that fraud has actually always been a problem in the market, but because of the pandemic as well as technology changes, what we've been seeing in the past couple of years is just unlike anything that we have ever seen before, and that by and large, brokerages have not been preparing themselves to adequately protect against bad actors who tend to be faster, smarter, and more technologically savvy than how a lot of these businesses were built in the first place.
And from your experiences as well, have there been any kind of changes in terms of the nature of fraud? Is there something new, or is it kind of a more refined version of the same old process?
It's a little bit of everything. So they're definitely getting more sophisticated, and what they'll do is a lot of sort of pressure testing. Can I get in through this angle? Can I get in through that angle? And then once they find some kind of weakness, they're really good at exploiting it. And so as a broker, what's really important is to be able to find a way to get access to a really wide range of data and visibility so that you can then layer intelligence on top of it and then integrate it across your business practices, and ideally really automate it so that you're removing as much opportunity for human error as possible.
And so, I've been privy to like random text messages with links, or hey, some people send ACHs to see if you can bill a carrier or a brokerage. What are some of the more common ways that these bad actors are trying to probe the defenses before they can really get in?
Yeah, so something that we've started doing here is really thinking about tactics and turning them into personas, because we find that it makes it a lot easier for a broker to be able to identify them. So one that we talk about a lot these days is a zombie carrier. So you're typically a carrier who has had, you've been doing sort of perfectly fine business, you decide to sell your MC, all of a sudden we see a really big flurry of onboarding activity with a bunch of different brokers from a carrier who had been really, really stable or maybe not done any business in a long period of time. Very high indicator that that MC has been purchased, and that then by typically a bad actor who is trying to take advantage of that. We also see a lot of phishing attempts, which we like to call anglers. They're kind of coming in, doing some social engineering, trying to send these text messages. And so one of the things that we talk to brokers and carriers a lot about is just basic education. We find that this is at the end of the day a relationship business, and sometimes those easiest things are the ones that are overlooked, and really leveraging relationships with carriers to educate them. Here's how you should expect to be engaged with me. Here are things to look out for, so that you're really helping out the carrier as well, and coming from that place of trust to begin with.
I've had that happen before. It's got to be hard, especially now that the prevalence of dispatching services, where a dispatcher will be in charge of multiple MC numbers, and then how do you know if your dispatching service is not actually the other one? Well, tell us a little bit about, especially from that technology standpoint. One of the instances you mentioned was carrier packets. Is that literally an example of an older MC, 3 to 5 years, suddenly fills out 200 RMIS packets or something? Is that the kind of stuff we need to start paying attention to?
So that's something that we monitor on our side. Is so across our entire ecosystem of products, what we're really looking at is behavioral patterns and what might be changing or different from what we've seen to be historical behaviors. So we can see if someone is filling out a flurry of onboarding packets, that's not their typical behavior. We can flag that in our system, flag that for our broker community as well. But also what we're thinking about is how do we do an identity check to be able to say, are you actually who you say you are? And we leverage ID verification technology for that, where we have a carrier submit their government ID, they take a selfie, we make sure that those two things match. We make sure that that contact information then matches the information that we have in our database, all to ensure that that carrier is who they say they are. We also then do a check to say, are you an authorized representative of this MC? So doing checks to make sure, do you know enough information about this MC to prove that you are legitimate and can do business on their behalf? And then the third thing that we have implemented is a risk check. So through our product risk factors, we leverage billions of data points across our entire product ecosystem, like I said, to be able to understand these behavioral patterns. And if it flags that there is a carrier who's onboarding at any point or in a broker's network that represents too much risk, we're able to flag them and block them and notify the broker for them to do at least more due diligence.
And from your experiences in helping out customers as well, understanding the pain points, is there carrier sized, when we're talking about the potential for fraud and the risk, is it a small carrier, a large carrier? Is the risk across the board? Does size matter?
Yeah, what we see is that risk definitely looks different depending on the profile of the carrier. So through our risk factors product, part of what we do is we have our whole data science team who's really looking at how does risk get assessed differently from carrier characteristics, and how do we make sure that we're not over impacting a large carrier fleet versus a small carrier fleet, because you would expect a large carrier fleet to have more reused phone numbers, for example, right? And so we don't want to be too blunt in how we're really thinking about fraud indicators. So we do a lot of calibration to make sure that we're balancing that correctly. We take a lot of customer feedback as well. So if a customer is saying, there's something miscalibrated about this kind of carrier, we immediately go back and understand why is our algorithm flagging it this way, and how can we add additional nuance to make sure that we're calibrated.
And looking at like geographic factors as well when we're trying to do it. I know the old joke, the Glendale Mafia, or the Chicago carrier network, where you both need them and don't need them. Someone's going to come after me for that. But is that something when looking into the data set? Is there a geographic risk factor? I'm prefacing this because as we're also seeing more nearshoring, we're going to see more carriers enter the system. Do I need to worry about location?
So we tend to see less risk about location, broadly speaking. I think there are certain exceptions where we know there are sort of high-risk areas. But again, I think that a lot of it has to do with behavioral patterns and when a pattern starts to get broken. So we pay a lot of attention to IP addresses. We have our huge product network with over 60,000 carriers on our load board and RMIS and interacting with us in all different kinds of ways. And so we track whenever there has been an incident with a carrier and associated with a particular IP, we can block and flag that IP address, so understanding when that might be used, and also understanding when behavior differs from where they're actually taking loads versus where we see search behavior, and any time that those things don't actually add up, it can help give us some additional intelligence.
So like if I'm an intra-Florida carrier and I'm suddenly looking for Washington State, and that's all I'm searching, and you see me making movements on, that would be a suspicious activity.
That's an example of something that we might be trying to look for, yeah.
Looking at the technology and the sophistications, everyone's talking about API integrations. brokerages and carriers are more willing to do it. Do you ever worry about, is that another leading indicator in terms of suddenly this API is scraping everything when before they never used it? Is that something where the technology integration is adding an extra layer of concern if it does get penetrated and the account is now compromised?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a whole team that takes sort of reports in from customers of, we think that there's a load posted on our behalf that's not actually ours. It doesn't have our correct information, and we do a lot of investigation to understand what's real here, how do we take it down, how do we get that account back up. But we also do tons of proactive screening, again, to understand, is login behavior normal, is API access here normal, to make sure that we're certainly keeping our system safe, but more importantly, that their accounts are kept safe as well.
And looking ahead, kind of best practices, we'll start with carriers. Is there anything, if I'm especially a carrier and I'm not as familiar with the risk and the threats, is there anything I should be doing based on your experiences or what's happened to other folks who have been a victim of fraud?
Yes, so from a carrier perspective, it is all about keeping your accounts safe. So again, I think basic InfoSec education is the lowest hanging fruit that just isn't done at the end of the day. Carriers tend to be less technologically savvy. They might not have any kind of tech education. What we see is that they use the same password for every single tool that they operate. They're not familiar with how to flag phishing texts or phishing emails, and so the most common incident that we see with carriers is purely that their accounts get compromised, and because their accounts get compromised, they use the same password across all of these tools. You're giving access to a bad actor to pretty much everything that you have. So that, hands down, is the best information for a carrier, and carrier sales reps are the ones who are best positioned to give them that education, because they're the ones who really form that relationship with them.
So it's almost like as a broker, you're also acting like as a partner, and then, hey, I'm trying to book you on this load. You've just been flagged. Something's up with your stuff. Have you changed your password recently? That kind of building relationship and helping when beforehand the carrier may not know until they try to book a load.
Exactly. We really think about building these businesses based on trust first. And so you certainly want to make sure that you're detecting fraud and you're detecting bad behavior, but really looking for those opportunities to build trust at every step along the way. And so that's partly validating that a carrier is who they say they are. That's making sure that they are qualified to do business with you, but then also continuing to establish that relationship, know each other as people, so that you become the first person that carrier calls whenever they're ready to take their next load.
And in the event of a carrier, we got a little bit of time left. In the event I do have fraud and I no longer can book loads, what are the steps I need to take to get back into it in terms of having that access and being able to book on these platforms? Because I can imagine if I do get cut off, that could be a big source of my income.
Yeah, absolutely. So number one, we see that carriers tend to not actually engage with the police frequently enough when they have had some kind of compromised incident. We've been forging a relationship with the FBI over the past couple of years. I can say that we are really well informed of a lot of task force and efforts that they have instituted to really make sure that they're a strong partner to the industry in solving the problem. And the best way that they can help the industry is by being really informed about what has happened and reported incidents. So that is sort of the step number one if something has happened. I would also then make sure that you are reaching out to your partners. So as a broker, as a vendor, we all have the opportunity to understand, get more information, and make our own decisions about whether or not we feel that we want to sort of wave flags, reset those accounts once we can verify enough information. And so that's the second step that a carrier should take.
It's not the end of the world, but you need to do your due diligence and go through the right steps.
Absolutely, yes.
Well, Lisa, really appreciate your time as well. It was a really fun talk, given the fact of the importance of this topic. Not only is it evergreen, but the forest is growing right now. Folks want to learn more about Truckstop, get in contact. What's the best way?
Truckstop.com. That has all the information about all of our products. And you can also find me personally on LinkedIn, Lisa Haubenstock.
Really appreciate your time, Lisa.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Oh, let me take this off here. Here we go. Boom. Don't mind the pause, folks. I'm more of a holding the mic kind of person here. Excellent. Always fun to get to talk with the folks at Truckstop. I've had personal experiences as a broker and a carrier working with them, and it's a huge issue. Shout out to Truckstop, though. They were the first one to notice if you scrape their load board. I was very proud of them. Big shout out to them. They called me, and they were not very happy. It was an accident. It's cool now. That was 3 years ago, so it's under no NDA. But, yeah, Don't do that. But on to something else. We're going to be talking with, speaking of brokerages here, we're going to be welcoming on Jay Gustafson. I'm sorry if I'm spelling your name wrong.
Gustafson, you're close enough.
Gustafson.
Yeah.
One messes up my name too.
all right. It's all right.
EVP of Brokerage Operations at Echo Global Logistics, talking about how 3PLs can help carriers navigate challenging market conditions. And it is definitely challenging.
It's been interesting.
Let's talk about that. And so first, tell us a little bit about yourself and let's get started.
Sure. So my name's Jay Gustafson, EVP of Brokerage Operations at Echo Global Logistics. I've been in the industry since about 2004. In my current role at Echo, I oversee a combination of both our capacity and internal operations, and then work with our technology organization on our overall digital transformation strategy.
Yeah. And I think one of the cool things, being in the industry since the OG early days, brokerages have grown market share. Like when I started in 14, someone had said it was like the 3-3-1, 3 asset-based carriers, 1 broker in your routing guide. But now brokerage market share is estimated between 30 and 50%.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about that, especially how growing the share, but now as we're kind of, depending upon who you ask in the upswing, keeping it.
Yeah, so I'd say the carrier brokerage shipper dynamics have certainly changed from when I entered the industry in 2004. I remember early on in my career, broker was almost like a 4-letter word. It was like a bad word. It was you tried to navigate how to express who you were to the companies you were speaking with. Now, 3PLs, freight brokerages, are looked at not just as the shipper community, as a primary carrier within their network. Carriers are looking at 3PLs as a primary source of freight. In many ways, brokers are looked at as a shipper now to the carrier community. And so, from my point of view, during these challenging times over the last couple of years, the opportunity for 3PLs to act as business partners to carriers, help them run smarter, more thoughtful operations has really become prevalent.
And what are your thoughts as well? There's been talk about an impending upswing, depends on who you ask. I like the conversation. It is still bad, but at least it's not as bad as yesterday. So somebody out there is going to say, I still can't make money. Don't give me that. But as we're looking at that and how, as carriers, need to maintain relationships, in your experiences, it felt like carriers, at least my experiences, carriers didn't always have a good relationship when I was a broker.
Sure.
It really gave me a hard time. How should we treat this moving forward in this new upswing with technology?
So, from my standpoint, this is a relationship-driven business, and relationships give carriers access to high-quality, repetitive freight movements. That's the relationship really opens that door. And so as you think about a soft market or a tight market, you want predictability. You want to have a smooth operating schedule. You don't, as a trucking company, want to just chase transactional opportunities that are maybe available on a load board. And so I think the value proposition to carriers in loose markets or tight markets remains the same. 3PLs are a source of repetitive, repeat business. We're not moving freight looking at each shipment as an individual transaction. We're looking to keep fleets moving. We're looking to contract business with regular carriers. That's even more important to both us and the trucking companies we work with in a tight market. And so I really think that the value proposition as we hopefully enter that upswing in the market is that carriers can look at 3PLs as a shipper partner and someone who can be a repetitive source of business, so that in the event the market does go the wrong direction, the freight's still there, the predictability in their shipping schedule is still there. Hot market, loose market, the value proposition is pretty much the same in my eyes.
And I always have a question. One of my biggest things I'm thinking of is the routing guide. We'd like to talk about with Sonar data, routing guide failures reaching a certain point. Is there a concern, especially in carrier-broker relationships, that certain sizes will act differently depending upon where we are in the market? Is that ever a concern?
I think it's a concern, and it's part of our procurement strategy. I don't know if you could necessarily say a certain demographic operates in a certain way. You see many owner-operators whose business is built off of deep customer or 3PL relationships where they're doing the same moves every single week. And so I think it's a little bit less about the size of the entity and more about their approach to having a focused niche region, set of lanes that they're moving. The carriers that are, again, just chasing the transactional opportunities, I think are the ones that really struggle to operate in this current market condition.
Well, there's some old data I saw. The average age of a carrier now is like 3.4 years. It was down to 1 year during 2020 to 2021. Is there a new cadre of carriers? You've been in the biz since '04. You've seen a lot of different types of carriers and technology adoption rates. Is there anything of like a new breed of carrier that you want to target? Is there something I can do as a carrier to make me look better?
I think there's a number of things. I'd say and I think the softer market really put focus on three key things in my mind: service, fraud prevention, as you were just talking to Lisa about for a few minutes, and also environmentally friendly operations. And so I think carriers that focus on service, focus on risk mitigation, focusing on reducing their carbon footprint, they're differentiating themselves from the general carrier population. And those are the types of carriers that we want to work with. We want to work with carriers that are, again, not just chasing the high money freight, but are building sustainable businesses. And in this market especially, service is the name of the game. And so the companies that focus on on-time pickup, on-time delivery, high levels of communication, data visibility from a integration standpoint, those are the companies that are getting increased volume from Echo. That influences our decision-making around who actually gets booked on our freight.
So like ELD integration, sharing that data, making sure you're using the tracking, having the driver app, that kind of.
I think it's that, and it's also when problems occur, how you deal with those exceptions. I think that the technology allows for smoother access or easier access to information.
Yeah.
It's really how you deal with the issues when the exceptions occur.
Instead of saying my truck is broke down, please be honest if it did break down or if your driver slept in.
Yep.
So, I love the conversation because carrier-broker relationships are one of those kind of like, sometimes you feel like you're frenemies, sometimes you're not.
Sure.
But everyone needs each other in this regard. If I'm looking ahead, moving forward, trying to grow is there still a sweet spot in terms of, I remember it's like 50 to 150, 25 to 75, depends on who you ask. Has the technology changed that game where if I'm looking I can have access at any fleet size so long as I do the technology?
The technology has definitely opened up the long tail of trucking companies that 3PLs typically would have struggled to deal with purely through person-to-person relationships via phone and email. So I think the technology for us in many ways has acted as like a marketing engine to bring new carriers into our network, to introduce capacity to us that we may not have discovered on our own. And then the combination of the relationship plus the technology really allows for that fleet to foster in terms of the relationship with Echo. And so while it used to be really easy to pick up a phone and call a larger fleet and get access to dozens of equipment, the technology is now enabling that same type of access to information and access to capacity that didn't exist historically.
And, being in your position, conversations with shippers as well, looking at your outlook into 2025, what are some of your thoughts here? I'm not going to pull out the crystal ball. We don't have one yet. But how do you see the market moving ahead? What should carriers and brokers be really cognizant in the next 6 months?
Well, I think that the thing that I'm keeping an eye on is the trajectory that capacity exits the industry. We've been at the bottom of the market now for 24, 30 months, depending on who you speak to. And what's been surprising to me is that while week over week you're seeing more and more trucking companies go out of business, the capacity hasn't necessarily left the industry at the same rate as the active MC numbers have left. So that's really what I'm keeping an eye on. And I think that that's ultimately going to influence where pricing goes this next year. I know some are calling for the freight recession to be over. I think that the capacity exit is really still a little foggy.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what I'm personally keeping an eye on to determine where the market goes 6 months, 12 months from now.
And is there any kind of thing in terms of, let's say I'm a carrier, long-established brokerage, I've been running this dedicated lane for the past year. I know that rates are going up. how should a carrier handle that conversation if they're treating their brokers like a part of the customer mix? Would that be a trickier conversation? Because I know when I was a broker, I'd be afraid I'd be underwater as the thing's moving. Is there any tips?
We're a partner to the trucking companies that we work with. The last thing we want is keep pushing rates down to a place where a trucking company can't stay in business.
Yeah.
And so we want them to reach out to us proactively, let us know that the market dynamics are changing and maybe their pricing needs to change. We'll look at that opportunity in a thoughtful way and determine based off of service history, carrier relationship, where we think the market's going, and do we keep leveraging that capacity or go out to the market and find somebody new. We do need to make money as a 3PL, but we're nothing without the carriers that we work with on a daily basis. And so if we were only focused on price, churning that carrier out to find the next cheap one wouldn't really create a sustainable operation or allow us to deliver the high levels of service our shippers look to us to deliver.
So it's almost like the savvy carriers need to act like a big carrier in that, where am I at your service scorecard? Where am I in your routing guide? Here's my rate, here's my service, and then come that with a conversation saying, I'm 95%, this other's guy 85.
I think that's a great way to describe it. That's the conversation Echo as a large 3PL is constantly having with our shippers.
Yeah.
And I think you need to put yourself in those shoes as a trucking company and have those thoughtful, data-driven discussions to help you retain business and not just retain, but grow with the 3PLs or shippers that you're working with today.
Well, I think we got a little bit of time left. Any closing thoughts here, market outlook? Best thing you want to predict?
Ooh.
I don't have like a sandwich and a hot dog question, but I'm...
Well, I will just say, I think that, there's been the great debate over the last decade around automation. Now you're hearing all of this buzz about AI, and I think, as Craig mentioned in some remarks earlier, this is still a relationship-driven business. From my point of view, the 3PLs that are going to succeed are the ones that have a focus on both technology and relationships. At Echo, our slogan is technology at your fingertips, experts by your side. The technology is there to help automate and provide transparency to some of the mundane tasks that exist within our industry, but the relationships are really what's critical from a growth standpoint and a trust standpoint. And so my bold prediction is that the world of just automating everything in the freight brokerage is a little bit of a pipe dream, and that combination of tech plus deep relationships is really the winning formula.
What's the art of people in a science?
Exactly.
Can't be one or the other.
Can't be one. Yeah, that's a great way to say it.
Jay, really appreciate your time as well. Folks want to learn more, get in contact, best way to find out.
Echo.com, you'll be able to find anything you want about our organization, and you can find me on LinkedIn at Jay Gustafson.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Have a great day.
That's going to be a wrap for this show, but if you're just joining us, we'll be on Apple, Spotify. We're going to send this all stuff. You can find it later on. Also, check out the newsletter, freightwaves.com/loaded and rolling. That's it for today on this special episode. I'll see you later.